Good afternoon. It's 1:47 p.m. on April 2nd, 2021. Despite all else that's happening, there were very important matters that needed to be attended to today. As I said yesterday, were there to have been movement by the end of the evening in order to engage in emergency measures concerning what's going on downtown, then we would have a different situation that we could be dealing with. I guess there is still a need for that to pend, as my understanding is that there are factors involving other localities that need to be attended to. I anticipate they're being attended to at this time frame in an expeditious manner. Additionally, there was another factor concerning yesterday. An effort was made to allow for a, shall we say, continuation of things that had been mentioned earlier by me, specifically as Attorney General, in conjunction with what is ongoing at this time based upon what happened this past weekend. There was an understanding that the situation was escalating, and in consideration of that and other timelines going on, I did provide a very comprehensive analysis of what would have been the sort of plan for implementation at a very specific period of time. I will say that one of the things I understand is that by law, in order to prosecute a case for treason, you need two witnesses. And one of the very strategic actions that has happened, and that I anticipate a lot of people are experiencing right now with COVID-19, is that many people are being denied even one witness that is confirmed, much less two at any given time. Now, I've already made public pronouncements, and I've already alerted people before I made those announcements public about my concern that there was a specific process that had been invoked specifically in consideration of the intercession of individuals with members of the Health and Human Services via the invocation of an executive order during Barack Obama's lame duck session that thus far has not been challenged and is technically still in effect until November of this year, that actually provides a significant question when it comes to these so-called one-on-ones, especially if we're talking about an attempt to take somebody out of what would otherwise be an appropriate process regarding redress of grievances when it comes to any kind of program administration, but also if we're talking about things on a more comprehensive level. And if we start factoring in considerations regarding things like bonding for first responders and or things like the actual technical administration of the actual government functions, then we get into another matter altogether. At this point in time, however, I am not going to, shall we say, relent. It is actually an emergent. And what I've realized, as I've said earlier, is that there have been a series of consistent actions that have happened. The unfortunate thing is that the correlations between what should be taken as steps domestically and locally and how, rather than actually implementing real-time, literal standards and actions that are immediately needed here, including in efforts to forestall or prevent against further crime and or to actually provide for people's needs. Now, oftentimes what ends up happening is they appear to be executed in a more comprehensive manner in another theater that may or may not have the same sort of variables to consider, and also may have different considerations of taking certain kinds of action that either would not be tolerated or palatable here, or that would not be available here in the same manner. This is one of the reasons why it's very important that we identify where we understand we are, and if we are operating under a certain mentality or authority, that we keep to it, and that we are accountable to our understanding of what the requirements are. If you say you're providing medical services, then you are beholden to certain standards about what qualifies one to provide medical services, as well as allow for the execution of decisions about other people's lives, including ones that could dispossess them of their rights and or their property and or actually impact their actual physical well-being. If you're using those opportunities for any other reason and you refuse to identify yourself, then you leave yourself open to being implicated in the suspicious activities that rightfully need to be questioned. So, I'm not trying to be suspicious. I am not operating under some sort of healthcare mandate. As I've said before, I understand that there has been and infiltration of various government agencies by organized crime elements that have sought to try to compel people to agree to illegal activity under the auspices that they are being protected by somebody in a government role. Now, I could go on and on, as I have, about where I understand the origins are. I believe this would have been best suited for an actual formal judicial process and or even something akin to a congressional hearing. Thus far, other things have been prioritized. And instead of anybody else taking responsibility for being in a representative role, then the only kind of representation that that is available is self-representation. So with that in mind, let us return to the point. The point being that yesterday I was discussing how there was a process whereby I understand, based upon things that had already been made, concrete, tangible, literal investments by the community, including in manners that drew on public resources that were available, not just, by the way, during the COVID-19 emergency situation. These are parts of processes that had been available to people who are homeless or are in some sort of situation where they need some sort of material support from the community, including in the terms of food or clothing access. And I already know and already understand that there is an economy that goes on in connection with this, and I think that it could be considered very valuable. So far as it is reflection of an investment by the government in appropriating for the administration of those programs, then the understanding I have is that there is a value already that has been appropriated into them. And so what is done with them is about as much as taking care of us as an individual, as providing us with a means by which we can also engage in civic participation at the various levels that are required at the moment. Considering the kind of circumstances we're in right now, that I personally have been acknowledging the contributions that have been made from the community. Now, can one say that there might be some questionable activity associated with these distributions? Absolutely. And I've been monitoring that, and I've been tracking that for a considerable amount of time. But I also understand that we're talking about very high-level implications here. Ever since, for instance, I will just bring up one example, and then I will move on. There was a Supreme Court case within the last 3 years that actually specifically references some of the factors that are of material concern in questions regarding distribution of foods, including food from the food bank, and how this can be paired with other kinds of alleged assistance programs for people that are homeless or people that are in need. Now, if it has been allowed to make it to the level of the Supreme Court, and there was a proceeding, and there was an opinion issued by the Supreme Court that was allowed to be put into the public realm and on the official record as being the decision in that proceeding, and that specific opinion has within it serious questions that need to be challenged directly at the level of the Supreme Court regarding its implications in illicit distribution, then I contend the burden of proof is on the level it's at, which at this point in time is the Supreme Court of the United States. In consideration, however, I do believe there has also been a lot of good faith investment by people who took advantage of what they had access to at the time and provided it. And so in the course of that, I have composed a budget that reflects what would both be questionable and challenging in terms of understanding how it correlates with metrics that are ongoing, but needs to and will be engaged in a process of moving forward on charges and moving forward on a process of redress so that what has already been invested can be appropriately characterized, and so its recirculation will not just recirculate more of the crime that has already accrued. In consideration of that, right now we are in a situation that needs to be disclosed, so I will. The metrics, or rather the value of items that were originally identified, that were correlated yesterday. One of the things I said is that there is already an inherent value that came due in a certain way. If I understand, for instance, that these were all investments that were made over a year ago or within a certain time frame, those that were over a year ago up until the beginning of April had a certain value associated with them. Now, it's one of these things, if you think about, for instance, the federal budget, this is one of the things I'm learning, right? And that we need to take into consideration. Sometimes when these outlays or when appropriations are made as part of the federal budget or even a state or local budget, they can involve outlays that might be several years, including decades. And if those outlays are for projects that might have a bond on them. That bond itself may be for a considerable amount of time. And in fact, many of the municipal bonds that have been issued in the last few years are for at least 20 years. And so not only is there that, but then there's the understanding that if they're very high level projects, they may be connected to some sort of financing that itself would also include other kinds of fixed assets where there are all kinds of terms associated with that. And so the understanding that it might correlate with, for instance, a federal budget from 4 decades ago. Well, right now, I personally am in a situation where factors in my life and things that are very important for the safety of the people are actually working on that kind of a time frame. We're talking about 40-year terms. So the understanding that it just so happens the amount that had accrued before April 1st of 2021, based upon an understanding of the value of the contributions that had been made by the community to me personally, and excluding what is evidence and will be pursued specifically as a particular kind of evidence, was at a amount that factored into the distinction between the budget that President Jimmy Carter recommended to Congress and what Congress was attempting to move forward on at its inception. Now, the good thing about this is it's very illuminating in a very important matter right now, because right now, the United States of America on the federal level is operating through an alleged congressional appropriations process that is absolutely unconstitutional. It is not the official, literal, legally standing, legally binding, constitutional appropriations process. And we're in a very interesting situation in this regard because it's been going on for several years. The actual official appropriations process on the federal level, it's not been moving forward in a constitutional manner. I've attempted to challenge this before the Supreme Court of the United States 3 of the last 4 years. But now we're in the situation where they're trying to make justifications about so-called relief from COVID-19 without even accurately reflecting what it really means, especially in consideration of the kind of political volleying that's going on in another level. And we're going to have to discuss more at another time. In the meantime, this is also a factor that is very important because it just so happens that a 40th anniversary of this particular budget distinction and discussion between the Carter administration and the Congress under the Carter administration happens to correlate with the same metric, or rather the same number, in American dollars of currency in circulation in Hong Kong. And this was something that was understood to be the amount of money in circulation in Hong Kong at the beginning of this year. So that means there's been a 90-day period whereby that metric meant one thing 90 days ago, and then as of yesterday, well, it means something else. So these are things that are very, very significant. I will disclose that one of the things that I've been tracking for several years is a specific pattern that involves a sort of intake through Hong Kong and a circulation through and a exit through Singapore. This is very specific, and I'm disclosing this now because the contrast of finding this specific information in the Carter administration budget, which actually could portend positive things, especially if there's some sort of reconciliation, but then to also understand that rather than it being able to post, so to speak, here within the United States at a time where it could be very important, that there is this added element of understanding that at the beginning of the year, when otherwise it could have been availed of in one manner, but had to be forestalled for 3 months, it was reflected as being the amount of currency in US dollars in circulation in Hong Kong. So I'm aware of this. However, it is, as I've said, it is the metric that will be one of the things that would be the initial investment for this time frame. And the hope is that we are going to be doing things in this month that will allow for the accrual over the setting of various benchmarks. We're going to keep our budgets, and I'm going to engage in my own personal effort to do things that I would need to do in order to provide anything that would then be able to be used to bring income, actual income, the kinds of things that a state is supposed to do. kinds of things that a community does all the time, like the labor that goes into getting together all of the items that one is going to put into a care package that they deliver or distribute to people who have a need for it. The kind of thing that when people take what comes in and they receive whatever the goods are, they go through it and they look through it and they make sure that it's appropriately taken care of and that it meets the standards that need to be made, and so that then when it's put available for distribution to the people, that's done correctly. And there's a lot that could be done, in a particular way. There's certain things that have formal standards that need and industrial standards that need to be adhered to. But what we're dealing with is a situation where there has been a very comprehensive level of corruption that has pervaded the formal structures and the formal system. And so the value we have to work with right now is one that has been a part of an informal structure. That does not mean it's illicit in and of itself, and it does not mean that it is somehow less valuable. This is not just about laundering illicitly acquired assets in order to try to give it a legitimate front. It was legitimate to begin with in terms of the intention that went into both the delivery and the acquisition. But if it has been used to, as I contend it is, and they're attempting to do now, if it has been used to launder other people's assets, including via derivative or even literal expression, this is something that we can and should be restituted for. And in the course of being restituted for it, we should also be able to be availed of the value we've already invested just by providing it to each other. So that's what's going to be going on moving forward. I'm keeping this as an initial introduction. My plan is to start identifying there are certain metrics that are going to be coming due in May based upon what was already invested. But during this month of April, what was happening last year at least was a period of time when factors were being evaluated. And by the end of April of last year, I had officially started putting things into reserve. It's going to be a month of preparing, or a month rather, of doing things with an understanding that we're going to deliver on it. And insofar as there is an executive decision to be made, this is a month where we have credit that we're going to start actually actualizing for delivery by meeting the benchmarks that have already been determined beginning in May. This is why what we do now we have to keep track of, and we also have to then be in a process where we can reconcile them with each other. I will let you know that the first dates of concern that we are going to have to work with if we are understanding a month ahead and anticipating a month ahead are going to be May 5th. So starting on Monday, this is going to be a very important time frame. And insofar as I'm a government of one, then and the role that I'm in would also be supported by an understanding that at the executive level, action was taken yesterday with the intention that that executive action would have been made public on Monday. And then insofar as it would have been made public on Monday, then it would have provided a, shall we say, kind of foundation for consideration of various values that could also be politically backed. You understand that this is about a literal material capital acquisition and